Welcome to Income for Baby Boomers. If you want to learn about exciting new businesses each week from other boomers who speak your language and have started a unique and profitable business from home, you have come to the right place. For those who would like to try some of these low investment opportunities, stay tuned. We'll help you get started in your own profitable adventure. Now with your host and entrepreneur, Ken Queen.
Folks, I'd like to introduce you to Greg Crabtree, consultant, small business expert, author of Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. Welcome, Greg. How you doing?
Very good, Ken.
That's
I
great.
appreciate you having me.
Oh, super. And I think your background and your age is just perfect for our audience. And the expertise you have, well, numbers is a big problem for most of us. I've owned several companies myself over my lifetime, but numbers has always been a struggle. So I'm going to learn a lot today along with all the listeners.
You'll find that you're not alone, and some of the best entrepreneurs out there are not great with numbers, and that's why it really kind of struck me as to create a system that allowed them to know enough about numbers, but then not use so much numbers that stifles their creativity and their ability to be a great entrepreneur.
Well, that's great. So, okay, there's a limit to it. You should let numbers control you, it sounds like.
Well, you almost can take it almost similar to what we see in the golf world now. There's guys, just take, guys like the Tiger Woods of the world who struggle at times, and many people believe it's because they've gotten too technical, too much into the numbers and the data, and those things can be helpful, but you got to keep it simple. And, I think you'll hear a resounding theme throughout most business messaging right now that as much as we have big data and we have all kinds of technology at our hands, what's simple? And simple is pretty powerful when you turn it loose.
So it's analysis paralysis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
when you go too far.
Exactly.
It paralyzes you. Well, I can't do that, and I can't do that. And so first thing, you don't do anything.
Yeah.
You're afraid.
Well, and I think the other thing about it, too, is the fact that you've got to look at who's selling you something. In the sense that, the people who push big data techniques and those kind of things, what are they selling you? I mean, obviously, the more analysis provides them more profit. And I get it, but there's a point that you can take anything to the illogical extreme. And I was speaking with an entrepreneur group in South Florida yesterday, and I was telling them, I said, the dirty little secret of my accounting profession is that we celebrate in most of those businesses back at the office when we've been able to bill you a really big amount for a lot of billable hours. And rarely has that accountant stopped and thought about, but did I do something useful for you? Did I do something, that audit that I just handed you that I charged $25,000 to $40,000 for? Did you just stick it in the drawer and then tell the accountant to send a copy to the bank and you never even opened it to consider how you should run your business differently from it? And that's the way most of those financial statement deliveries happen. So it's a different way of thinking.
Money flushed down the toilet when you do that.
That's right. Exactly.
It's gone. Just to go off subject a little bit, Greg, but I'm just trying to get your entrepreneurial roots, just to give an idea of where you're from and how long, when did you first start thinking about being an entrepreneur? You own the company here.
Yeah,
so
I do. Well, it was kind of one of those things that, to some degree, I was kind of an accidental entrepreneur. Started with an accounting firm that I learned the trade, got hired by a banking client of ours, and spent 3 years as their controller, and ended up controller and VP of operations. I found that the accounting gig wasn't really that good, wouldn't really take up all my time. After I'd worked for them about 30 days, I realized I had a 2-day-a-month job. And I was not bright enough to figure out how to fake it for the other 28 days. So I got involved in other things like managing the bond portfolio and did well with that, and still had time to spare. And so I ended up being VP of operations in my spare time. And it's interesting. I mean, working for the bank is really where I got a lot of my ideas about how businesses should be managed and run. And then when I left the bank and started my practice, I really spent, the next 10, 15 years studying entrepreneurs. And it's like, well, I could give them some information, but really what I was more curious about is how did they see the data and what were they using? And some of them had some really gosh-awful things that they created that they used to manage their business. But I started to talk to them more and think about, well, what are you seeing here? What is it that I'm not seeing, as a trained accountant? And I started to find that there's segments of data that are golden to the natural instinct of an entrepreneur. And then the thing that really got me into thinking like an entrepreneur was I joined the Entrepreneurs Organization in 2001. Yes. And that was a game changer because in EO, as we refer to it, it's, you spend, I joined the Atlanta chapter, which is actually 4 hours away from where I live. Mm-hmm. And so I spent 4 hours a month driving to Atlanta, 4 hours in the forum meeting with 9 other people who weren't accountants. And I was by forum rules prohibited from doing business with them. And then I spent a 4-hour drive home. Now, that's the reason why most accountants aren't in EO, because they look at that as 12 potential billable hours. Mm-hmm. Nothing can be that good. Well, I'm telling you it was, because I had 9 other entrepreneurs that I'd love to have as a client that I couldn't have as a client that became my focus group of what's wrong with the accounting profession. And they told me that basically one is nobody likes the April 15th surprise, which I agreed with them, and I had an idea of how to fix that. But secondly, they don't like being billed by the hour. And the guy who got me into EO was a client of mine that had already challenged me that says, hey, there is a standard pricing structure, so why don't you learn to bill on a fixed price basis? So today about 75-80% of what we do is on a fixed price basis, not on a hourly billing. Yeah, because right. A billable hour technique, I'll tell everybody that listens to this, billing by the hour is charging for your ignorance and giving away your expertise. And so it's not exactly, it's the lazy man's approach to what they think is value. But I'm telling you, as someone who used to bill by the hour, not every hour is the same. An hour is not a common unit of value. It is a common unit of cost, but it's not a common unit of value. But the third piece was the damning indictment of the accounting profession, because they said, oh, by the way, you see hundreds of businesses' intimate details, more so than any other advisor. You ought to have some idea of what works and what doesn't. And at that point, I knew they were dead right, because here we had been processing tax returns and financial statements and doing bookkeeping, not realizing that incredibly valuable business intelligence was right in front of our eyes that the Federal Reserve economic analysts would kill if they were able to see that. And here it is right in front of me for free. But, it doesn't involve a billable hour, because nobody's going to pay me to do research on it. But I chose to do research on it and develop my philosophies around the simple numbers concept, because I took 33 of our best clients in the initial research project, mm-hmm. and I said, how do I compare these businesses even though they're not the same industry? And it's really where we developed our philosophy that said, first, you got to remove distortions. And so we had to create a common language of business for the entrepreneur, which typically meant a singular P&L structure that we use for every business regardless of industry. Because anybody who listens to this podcast, if they pull out their P&L and everybody else pulls out their P&L, I can guarantee you that unless they're one of our clients, their P&L will look different than everybody else's. So what we've done is we've created the Tower of Babel for financial learning, and that nobody speaks the same language.
I got you.
And so we had to create a singular approach, but there's power in that approach that, we had to remove the distortions of the owner pay concept that, we'll talk about. And then we had to then figure out what part of the business model is really bait that's a pass-through to get somebody to do business with you, and where does the economic value chain really start? And so we developed this concept of what we consider to be true cost of goods sold to get to what we believe is gross margin, which is the top economic number of the P&L. And so when you take revenue minus the pass-through cost, if you're a construction contractor, it's materials and subcontractors. Mm-hmm. If you're a retailer, it's the cost of the things you sell. That you didn't make them. You're just there. You're using all those goods and what you paid for them to get somebody to do commerce with you. And so once you get to gross margin, then gross margin minus direct labor is the true powerful element of the business engine. And the relationship of producing gross margin for every dollar of labor that's there is the real essence of the heart of the engine of the thing that you make money with.
So you're not just teaching how to balance the books. you're saying to the entrepreneur, here are the customers that are making you money, or here are the ones that aren't, and you're getting right into the value of each customer.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Well, and think of it like this, Ken. I mean, because, if you're taught how to lay bricks, all you ever think you are is a bricklayer, versus, hey, you see that cathedral over there? We're going to build one of those. I think it's taught wrong. You've got to start with the end in mind of what is this thing, what does done look like? And what is the structure of that business engine? And I think we've not spent any time teaching the up and coming accountants or anybody in business that needs to know the function of accounting to understand, here's what done looks like. Now let's figure out how the pieces fit together so that you can get there. Because there's just no picture in their framework. And so we've had tremendous success of getting entrepreneurs who would self-proclaim non-numbers people to get it, oh, that's all I got to do. Okay, I can go do that. And it's just getting it down to 7 or 8 simple lines of data that are rolled up into the most important things. And then, then as you refine the business and try to squeeze out inefficiencies here or there, you're going to drill down a little bit, but you're going to find there's far less oil when you drill down than oil of what knowing and value is there once you look at it from the big picture level. But as you said, see, what we've done is created this construct that says the big part of your engine is revenue minus direct cost minus direct labor, which is what we then call contribution margin. We want you to be able to see that for the business in total. We want you to see it by customer, by location, by line of business, and potentially even by employee or work group, depending on how much you can account for things down to that level. In my industry, I can account for revenue by person. So I know my labor efficiency for every person as well as every customer, as well as the 4 lines of business that we have of consulting, tax, accounting, and outsourcing. And so we know which one actually is the most profitable and which one that you got to do on a bigger scale to then make the output worthwhile. And every business has that capacity.
So what we have without that knowledge is someone hanging on to, let's say, a really big customer that's actually costing them money.
Yeah, really.
And stepping over all the other customers who are making the money, focusing their time on the wrong client.
Absolutely. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. And so you got to really understand that profitability matrix. And part of it goes to the heart of what I believe when you start to do segment accounting. You don't try to do segment accounting to where you're doing a bunch of allocations of stuff. Your big warning sign should be, if I have to allocate a cost, I should probably ignore it for this analysis. And I learned this back at the bank. I mean, I created one of the first branch profitability statements that was ever done for the bank. And I did it the traditional accounting way the first time. And I took every cost, and because in my structured thinking, I thought every cost had to be spread across all activities, until I realized that the branches had the right idea. They said, I don't control what the home office cost is. Well, why am I held? That doesn't matter. And they're exactly right. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, all I had to do was, for my branches that were deposit generators, I had to give them an appropriate credit rate for the deposits they generated that the home office could loan. And then the home office that did the loans, they had to pay the branches for being deposit generators. And it created a construct that actually made sense. And everybody goes, oh, so we actually both need each other, really? Of course. Yeah, because one location was doing something that it couldn't do without the benefit of the others, and vice versa.
And that one model of that one location, everyone else could copy and get it right.
That's right. Yeah, because when we did the original book, one thing that I was not able to put in the book that we were working on at the time was the more expanded version of direct labor efficiency and management labor efficiency. So we were able to actually take in the book, I talk about just an overall labor efficiency of gross margin per labor dollar. But and I didn't have enough data at the time that I was doing it to feel comfortable putting it in the book. But I've since written about it. And if your listeners want to pick this book up by Vern Harnish, a book called Scaling Up, and I was able to write a chapter for Vern's book, which is a wonderful book that every business owner ought to have on their shelf, is I was able to put our current thinking in a chapter there that gives them both the direct labor efficiency and the management labor efficiency concept. And where we developed that idea was a landscaping business in Omaha, Nebraska. And we were able to look at their 4 divisions. So they had a irrigation division, a landscaping division, a snow removal division, and a mowing division. And we were able to look at their data and essentially, their revenue minus those direct costs for irrigation or landscape, you pass those out. So you had your margin. So gross margin per direct labor dollar of those work teams, they were doing a 4 multiple in both landscape, irrigation, and snow, but they were only doing a 2.5 in the mowing division, and they shared the data with a $10 an hour mowing guy, and this is where from the mouth of babes comes great wisdom. He said, "Well, looks like to me we shouldn't be in the mowing business."
I was just going to say that. Get rid of that division right now.
Right, and that's the power when you're looking at. You have this sense. You see a lot of data, but you got to boil it down to something simple that just screams at you. So they looked at it, scratched their heads, and said, "You know what? You're right if it continues to be that, but let's see if we can change it." And so what they did is they got rid of all their price-conscious mowing-only customers and kept the customers who did mowing along with the other projects. And they were able to keep the same LER from the other divisions, but they were able to raise mowing labor efficiency to about a 3.7 now. And so that made it far more acceptable and profitable to say, okay, well, this is worth doing then. And so that's a perfect situation of, we want to make it hard as a business owner. We keep thinking there's some magic, difficult thing that I will become aware of, and all of a sudden, I've got the secret, but at the end of the day, you look at it and go, oh, it's really just that simple, isn't it? And
but there's still, there is a secret there revealed. There is, obvious things sometimes are not seen.
Absolutely. And that's really where, as they look at it. Now, what it does is it also sometimes exposes that thing that you really don't want to address. So the one that is more common that you don't want to address is this idea that is what we call management labor efficiency. And so, the dirty little joke about management labor is that everybody will probably say, oh, well, I want to be a manager someday. And the reason why they say that is because they have in this perception in their mind that a manager is someone who just looks over things and don't really do anything, and they make a bigger salary. And, we call it a Cousin Eddie job. So we refer to as the character out of National Lampoon's Vacation movie, that Randy Quaid played, and Clark was asking him one day, he says, hey, Eddie, how come you don't have a job? And he says, well, Clark, I'm holding out for a management position. And
I can remember that dinner table or something.
Oh, yeah. And that's really, why, everybody thinks that. And so we felt like we had to come up with this measurement that holds management accountable to productivity. And so, yeah, you might be overseeing something, but you better be actionable in that overseeing.
Mm-hmm. And so you're producing some results.
Yeah. So we believe that in our philosophy that every dollar of labor should be held accountable to something. So direct labor is pretty simple. They're held accountable to gross margin, not revenue, gross margin. It's after the cost of goods sold is what the direct labor then has to work with. From a management labor standpoint, they're held accountable to contribution margin, which is the gross margin minus direct labor. So that's that output of the business engine. And it's a clean output. We don't want any loading of payroll taxes or benefits or, or overhead expenses or anything like that. No. Keep it clean. Keep it simple. And that output after the expenditure of direct labor wages, that contribution margin is what every management dollar is responsible for. Now, we see a huge range of multiples of direct labor efficiency to where, the landscaping company, their industry is about a 4, that we see. We can actually say,
boy, that's a really good markup.
Yeah. But there's a reason for that. What we found in terms of just a learning of the general concept of labor efficiency is the lower the wage rate. So the closer that you're in
to minimum wage
to $15 an hour, probably, those people, you're looking at a situation where it's typically about a 3 to 4 multiple that you got to get for that kind of labor. And then as the wage rate goes up, you're getting less and less of a multiple. Now, certain industries, like a staffing business, they're below a 2. They're actually, a staffing industry can be anywhere from $1.25 to $1.50. But think about why that is. Because in the staffing industry, you're just being paid to recruit and write a paycheck. You're not managing that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, that's why the margin is such that, you're going to have a big top line revenue number. But if you measure your success as a business across that top line, you're not going to look anything like, a software development business that has, software as a service revenue or something like that, or a service business, like in the professional services realm. So every business model has its indicator, but the way we teach it is that it's not so much what the other guy is doing. What matters is you pattern out the way it needs to be done that allows you to make a profit, serves the customer, and then you monitor those trends to make sure that labor is continuing to be consistently productive. Because I believe that we probably produce 15 to 20% lower GDP in the U.S. just because of inefficiencies. Not inefficiencies.
Well, for sure in our government.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah, don't even get me started on that. But even in the private sector, you could do easily 15 to 20% more productivity if people could stay consistently productive. And as I've watched this across business after business after business, you can see people get emotionally up, and they'll do it for a while, but they can't sustain it. And you've seen this there's plenty of
in sales. You see it.
Yeah, you see it. If you give your salespeople a monthly quota hit, do they sell more in the last week of the month or the first week of the month? I mean, but see, that's the thing.
Everyone's scrambling at the end.
Yeah, we've given people the wrong structure to be. Yeah. And a lot of it is motivation. I mean, my big thing on motivation, too, is that I put in the first book that this idea about most entrepreneurs want to create a variable pay structure for their employees because they want to one, push off the business variation risk onto the employee, but two, they believe they're under this false assumption that if they just give somebody the opportunity to make the right amount of money, that they'll do it without leadership and management. And I got news for you. You can never abdicate leadership and management. So therefore, why are you giving somebody a variable pay structure? Because they're not going to produce more just because you stuck something out there in front of them in 95+% of the times. I mean, it's been proven over and over and over again. Money, it sounds great. Everybody will shake their head and say yes. But when you measure it and look at the output, it does not change their behavior. And there's just tons of studies that continue to drive that point home, and yet we keep
even with sales.
And I'll tell you, the salesperson that's driven by money, you probably don't want to invite them to dinner. From a cultural standpoint, you probably wouldn't even want them in your business, from that standpoint.
You don't want to invite Killer home?
No, that's right. So from that standpoint, there has to be a different way. Dan Pink is another one of my favorite authors, and Dan has written some incredible research on motivation around sales thinking. He did a great article in Harvard Business Review on why salespeople should be paid a salary. And I think to a large degree, the way I've tried to talk about it is that I don't think the incentive drives the behavior. The behavior should actually produce a recognition of compensation, not that that extra compensation is you rewarding that person for them choosing to do something different, not thinking that that reward is what actually made them do it differently. And to get them to do it differently takes leadership and management. They've got to have a structure. They've got to have a purpose. They've got to have a focus. And really, I mean,
it's the egg or the chicken. What was first?
That's right. Yeah. And we've got it wrong in that we think that incentive was what caused that person to produce. And I think a lot of those high flying salespeople that people think are motivated by money, they're just wired that way. They will. How many of them truly would produce less if they didn't have an incentive structure?
That's true. They're A personalities.
That's right. They're driven. So from that standpoint, you just got to look at it. And as much as I kind of warn my entrepreneurial clients about incentive pay structures, we have come up with a way that we kind of adapted a concept that I was taught by Springfield Remanufacturing, Jack Stack's company that he developed, really made popular a concept called the Great Game of Business. So where they're basically using, business as kind of a game, and so it creates goals and incentives, and you are paid kind of a reward of that. But I think they would even argue that, it's from what Jack tells us, he says, the rank and file employees get about 13% of their base pay as a recognition, and management gets about 18% of their base pay. I mean, it's not an insignificant amount, but it's not an amount that is going to change how you live your life on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. And so we've adapted that structure in a way that we believe the key metric that we're generally tying that performance to for them to hit, whether it's an executive or rank and file. We tend to encourage more executive focus than it gets. Very few companies have the discipline and the acumen to explain it to the rank and file like Jack Stack's company. They made a wholesale commitment to really invest in education of their team about business. Mm-hmm. But the average employee, hey, I'm happy if I can just get their management team first of all to understand it. And so we structure it to where you're really trying to focus on producing contribution margin. We actually don't want them to focus on net income in the smaller businesses, because there's too much variation in terms of people wanting to argue about what the owner makes or the perks that the owner has. And it's a lot simpler to just focus on contribution margin, because I will tell you that once you follow our structure of taking a market-based wage as an owner out of the business, and you quit playing all the games and stuff that people do, the operating expense section of the P&L becomes very, very stable, and it's not a mystery. And so that if you hit X dollars of contribution margin, you're going to be profitable. I mean, there's no mystery to it. And that's a simpler way, because you get people's eyes up higher in the P&L. I don't want them focused on revenue, because that's a slippery number that isn't all equal. But contribution margin dollars are equal.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking that someone must have been reading your book, because they got rid of all middle management.
Well, to a certain degree. I mean, I think there is an argument that, so what you do see, I think what the new middle management is actually, so we have situations where, you've got a work team, and there's obviously a leader of that team. We consider all of those people direct labor. I mean, so even though that, like in our office, we have we call them pods. And so that work team has a pod leader, and that person has some management responsibility. And I know that their productivity is going to be a little bit diminished because they're not fully billable, because they have some management duties. But I can factor that into what I recognize as their performance target. And so, hey, just hit your target. And we're able, in our business and in many labor service delivery businesses, we can build a plan that says, hey, if everybody does their plan, we know we're going to be profitable. There's just zero mystery to it. And that becomes the easiest thing to build a plan. Then it comes down to execution. Now, here's a nugget that I'll tell you. This has excited me. This is the biggest idea that we've come across, and we stole it from the programming industry, in that we've had the best first 2 months of this year ever in our business, largely because we've adopted this concept of agile management that the programmers use, and using a sprint philosophy. And so agile is just a programming methodology where you take the task, break it into pieces. They call them stories. You assign values to those stories as to how much effort it'll take to get them done, and then you order the sequence in which they get done, and you focus on them over what's called a 2-week sprint. And so you start the 2 weeks with, okay, here's the elements of that story I'm going to work on, and then when you end the sprint, you look back and say, here's what I said I was going to do, here's what I actually did, what did I learn, now what's the next 2-week sprint? And so we've adapted that to our work environment, and I mean it's just been marvelous to see, good people that had always struggled to they would get close. Everybody, they're good folks. They tried hard, they worked hard, but they just didn't quite get to the finish line. And that's where I say that's really where, in the U.S., I believe we got 15 to 20% underproductive people, because we don't give them processes and structures to really achieve their best. Because here's the thing, even though we produce more in those first 2 months of the year, everybody is energized. And they're energized because they realize their own potential.
How do you stop people from sacrificing long-term to look good for this quarter type of thing?
Well, so we do that so we put fences around their productivity. So in our structure, we actually pay our staff hourly. So we pay them time and a half for overtime. But we give them a 200-hour, they're only allowed to work 200 hours of overtime in the calendar year. And so we monitor their budgets to make sure that they're not just spending more time. And because I have a fundamental belief, I think a lot of people have said they've improved productivity when all they did was pay people a salary and made them work longer. That's not improving productivity. That's cheating. And you've got to get a person productive in the physical time that they're present. And that takes a coordination. It also takes eliminating the bad producers. I'm telling you, we had a situation in our own office in the early 2013 where we got off to a slow start, and we were changing our data system. So I was middle of February before I saw my labor efficiency numbers, and we were just so horribly off labor efficiency you wouldn't believe it. So I immediately terminated the 2 people that I'd heard the grumblings of that were causing the problems with the team. And the next 2-week cycle, we produced $50,000 more with 2 less people. Now, and here,
efficiency is important.
You cannot, when people say that you do not understand the cost of an unproductive person, I'm telling you, we measured it, because I'm telling you, it was $25,000 a week that these 2 people were costing us. Because when one person is unproductive, guess what? They're not only making themselves unproductive, they're making one or more other people unproductive, and they're sucking the energy and the life out of the business. And it was just such an eye-opening thing, to do that. And so I believe that, a friend of mine, Steve Satterwhite, he wrote a book, that talked about his experiences. I think it's called Above the Line. And Steve makes a great statement. He says, everybody's an A player somewhere. It may not be in your business. And so just keep in mind, if you got people on your team that's not an A player, you are holding them back as well as they're holding you back. And
good point.
Yeah, and it's huge. So once you get those people going and you get them in that mode, and I believe you can't let people just work more hours for the same pay and call that increased productivity. That doesn't fly.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about scale. If you don't know what's working, how can you scale? Mm-hmm. So you need to know all the parts to this, so that, okay, now I'm going to open another branch. I know exactly what works and why it works, and that's what you get into where a lot of times it's more accidental, or they don't know what caused their success.
Well, you have to be careful, too, in the fact that the fallacy is you're thinking that I'm not profitable today because I just need more volume. Well,
no, that doesn't work.
you may be there was a great skit that Saturday Night Live did years ago called the First National Change Bank, and it says, what do you they make change for people. It says, well, 4 quarters for $1. It says, well, how do you make profit? Volume. And I'm sorry, that doesn't work.
Exactly.
But see, here's the thing about scale, though, because what you will see as you dominate a market segment is you will see pricing pressure, and you will see labor efficiency likely decline to a point. But that's really where, see, in my business model, I have two fluctuating dynamics. I've got the rate of direct labor efficiency, and I got the rate of management labor efficiency. So typically when you go to what everybody calls scaling a business, what you're going to find is you've got to get more skinny with your margin with your direct labor as you get deeper into the market. So your direct labor efficiency might drop from 2.5 to 2.3, but you make it up by making management labor more efficient. So that management team is managing more contribution margin that makes up the difference so that it does come out to be a win. Because I will tell you this, the secret to profitability is making your management labor productive, not necessarily making your direct labor productive.
I'm thinking of something you said earlier, too, which is interesting. The businesses that employ a lot more people on that bottom end, $10 to $15 an hour.
Yeah.
The profit level is 4 times, and as you go up the scale and you're paying someone $100 an hour, like an attorney or something that you've hired, you're making maybe 2 times, not 4 times.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I mean, a good number, so we have a lot of clients that are in government contracting. So this direct labor efficiency ratio is a close cousin to what in the government contract space is called a wrap rate. And a government contractor wants to know, for every direct labor dollar I charge, what should I bill the customer that allows me to cover my overhead and make a profit? And that's really kind of the idea behind it. And ours is just a slight modification of that, but it answers the same question. And so what you find is most of those engineering contracts that we have with our clients, they're around a 2 LER. And that's a person that probably entry level is about 50,000, and probably top level worker billable resource is probably going to be 125 to 150. And that number is where they make it work. And if they're a specialist type, they got special unique knowledge or something, they're probably looking at more in the neighborhood of, they might make a 2.2 or 2.3. And then if they're what we call a body shop contract. So they're providing labor to the government, but they're not really doing much in the way of managing them. Maybe the customer is managing them. Those people are down into like the 1.7 range that they can they can actually be successful with. And so that's kind of the dynamic, though. But you start to understand your business in a lightning fast way, because I'm only dealing with like 4 or 5 numbers in my head of understanding what it needs to make it profitable.
Excellent. Yeah, the simplification is where the power is.
Yeah.
So a lot of, I think you mentioned somewhere here that a lot of data that owners are gathering is worthless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's really kind of cool, that when they can look at it like that, it just allows people to not only analyze what has gone on, but it allows them in our models that we do for our clients, it allows us to create a lightning quick way of doing forecasting.
Let me ask you this, Greg. Let's go into a little different application of what you do. For someone to try to start something up, they're an accountant. Okay, I've got listeners. They've been an accountant all their life.
Yep.
All right. They've retired, and now they want to figure out how they can, make a go of it online, or somehow start something on the side. What would you recommend for them? What would you recommend they do?
Well, I mean, I think if you've kind of gone the original route, part of it is you kind of have to think differently in terms of turning yourself into a consultant. And what I would do is I would stop hanging out with accountants and I'd start hanging out with entrepreneurs.
Okay, entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
okay.
That's how it kind of turned my thinking around. Is I don't go to any state association meetings. One of the partners of the firm I started working for years ago, he said, "Why do I want to hang out with them? I mean, they're not my customer." So it does kind of tell you a lot. But the other thing I would do is I would start reading, and so I would tell you the guy that really got me to write my first book that did the forward for me, Vern Harnish, and then he invited me to add a chapter to his recent book, Scaling Up. I think Vern would be the first place that I would start because he's a great aggregator of good business thinking. And and so I think he writes probably one of the few blog posts that I really pay attention to, every couple of weeks when it comes out, because he's always pulling from the real forward-thinking guys. And then he holds a summit twice a year, one in Orlando and one in Arizona, that really is a good accumulation of the freshest business thinking, out there in the marketplace.
So probably his blog would be a real good place, or if he has one.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, he does. Yeah. And like I said, just go, gazelles.com is his website. So I think Vern is kind of a great place to start because he's very gracious to connect people with other thinkers in various areas. And you'll start to connect with, if you really want to think about where the world is going in terms of a futurist thinking, Peter Diamandis, with Abundance 360 is probably the next guy that you think of in terms of, kind of being aware of where things are going, because, accountants have a natural tendency to just think about being historical reporters of the past. And I got enamored early on in my career of learning how to create forecast models and predicting where we are going. And I think the entrepreneur out there is really hungry for someone who can create an actionable forecast that causes you to change what you do today because of where you want to get to. And the cleaner that you can create a model that helps people, and like I said, that's why we structured our data the way it is, because I'm not trying to do a forecast down to the account level. I've grouped things in a logical way that allows them to move in a natural fashion based on other numbers inside the model. So it's a totally self-contained deal that if you just tell me how much activity you're going to do, it'll give you the targets for labor. It'll give you the targets for how much you can add for management labor, for payroll taxes and facilities and so forth. And so you're trying to get it to where you're not making it so overburdensome. Because where I saw this in action, and we just created our own concept to do it, I did the 2 days tour at Springfield Remanufacturing at Jack Stack's business, and they still hold that tour today. And you can see machine workers in their engine plant that can explain a balance sheet, P&L, and cash flow statement better than any accountant I've ever met. and these guys, they forecast weekly. They reforecast the future weekly. They produce a combined consolidated financial statement for, I think they're up to like 100 companies in their group now. And they bring financials together every Wednesday and create a consolidated financial picture of not only what did they do in the last week, but what are they going to do in the next 5 to 6 weeks, and then for the rest of the year. That takes a tremendous discipline and foresight, to create a structure like that. But it's allowed them to be an incredibly stable business. SRC Holdings is the overall business, but they've just done a phenomenal job, in their industry. And they're in a nuts and bolts. I mean, they do engine remanufacturing. I mean, it's not exactly, building a website kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So, yes, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What else? I was thinking of going in another direction there too. Okay, so this accountant says, I'll start joining some of those groups. The 25 or 30 years of accounting that he's done, there's a value there, even though it might not be up to the level you're talking about, but there's always a value from those 30 years of experience, you would say? I mean, there's really something there.
Well, I think it depends on how you look at that experience. So, you may have been like I was at one point where, I was processing a financial statement and a tax return but I was really trying to get the job done, to get it billed, to get to the next project, and I didn't stop to really ponder what the data meant. And so if you've had that 25, 30 years of experience, I would start reliving some of those experiences and start thinking differently about some of those clients that you worked on in businesses and said, if I looked at that business in a different light, because I think differently about the clients that I had worked on before, I kind of came to these conclusions about what we found from our more recent research. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, I wish I knew that back then. I could have helped them better.
So you can actually reinvest in your past. That's a great concept.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can go back and reflect and say, okay, here's what I should have done.
Yeah.
I should have tried this, this, and this.
Yeah.
So you can apply it to the clients you're going to get today.
And I really think the idea is built around, I would encourage them to look at our modeling concept, that we write about, because I believe this is the way to look at a P&L. And everybody will lobby for their little tweak or their little that. And well, you can lobby all you want, but I'm telling you that I use this for every client, and it works because it's created this singular language. Because, my passion was, I don't want to be just a singular consultant. I wanted to build a consulting business. And so I had to prove that I could go train and hire and train another consultant to do what I do, because I'm not teaching them what is taught in business school. I'm teaching them unique ideas and concepts. Mm-hmm. And so once Brandon Gray got hired and developed, then I had the next one came along, it was Patrick Myers, and after Patrick was ready, then we hired Mike Boggs, and now we're probably ready to bring the next one on. And so I've got other people that are having this very same discussion with a client or somebody else, and I hear them as they're doing their calls, and they're saying it in a very consistent way in our philosophy of how we believe things, because it is a belief. It's not regurgitating rules. And so, and once you get your knowledge and understanding to that level, you're in a different plane than somebody that's just saying, well, debit's on the left and credit's on the right.
Well, I worked with attorneys and did something similar there, that they gave me 2 or 3 books and said, here's how we do the attorney business. A friend of mine wanted me to help him start an office, and I tried their methods for the first couple of months. But I said, this is going to take 10 or 20 years. Yeah. And I don't have that much time. Yeah. So I figured I'm going to do it my way now. And then over the next 2 months, we went from 0 to $65,000 a month in billing. But I didn't use orthodox methods. I figured, okay, we're going to try anything. We got to make this work. Especially in this case, I'd had over $50,000 cash in there helping him. So I was really motivated to make sure we.
It's like they say, the difference between a chicken and a pig and a bacon and egg breakfast. The chicken is an interested party. The pig's committed. So yeah.
Yes, I was committed.
You were committed.
Well, we're going to make this work.
And interesting. Talking about attorneys. We found this interesting niche. So we have several personal injury attorneys as clients, because we use this same model for an attorney. Believe it or not, most people would think, oh, you got to look at them differently. No, you don't. No, they have a business model just like everybody else. And a lot of them is like you said, getting them off of their traditional mindset of what we call the leftover mindset. Professions. That's all the profession businesses want to do, is they want to eat leftovers. In that, so it's like, here's what we take in, and here's what we spend on expenses, and everything's left over is mine. And it's like, well, that's not the right way to think, because you have a business and you have a job, and you have to separate yourself from the job that you have and the business that you own. And that business that you own is responsible to produce a profit. But you, as a worker in the business, are responsible to do a job for a fair price, for your compensation. And once you can segregate those two concepts, you will have clarity now in your data, so that you actually know what is the business producing. And what is it? What of that came from your effort for what you got paid for the job that you did, and what part of that came from the business being a business that if you ever wanted to extract yourself and replace yourself with somebody better, that business should still produce that amount of profit or more.
But I get what you're saying. If you're so focused on the billable hour, then you can't see the forest for the trees or whatever.
Here's the best example. So we had these two dentists as a client that own a 3-location dental practice, and we said, one of them, was not making as much as his partner, and he said, well, it's because I'm spending all my time managing the business. And I go, well, you're right. We need to fix that. So we need to pay you at a rate that what we would pay a practice manager for every hour that you spend managing the business. And so you keep up with those hours, and we'll pay you at a rate of $75,000 a year, because that's what we knew that we could get a practice manager for a 3-location dental practice. And we proved it because we actually hired the guy for them, and did a great job. And so, as it turned out, he ended up improving his pay because he was now focused on being a dentist. Because what I told him after, we offered what the idea was, I said, now, you can spend all your time working at that rate of pay, because as the owner of the business, you get to pick any job you want to have. The problem,
$10 an hour jobs, or
that's right,
$500 an hour jobs.
That's right, because you can pick any job you want, but the market picks your pay. You can pay yourself $300,000 a year for $10 an hour job, but all you did was steal it from the bottom line, because the market does not respect that value, and so they got it, and that is a common theme throughout. And the other thing that I keep bringing up in my talks, when I travel, is that this thing of, if you got a multi-owner business, when you got two owners, if they're both if you think you should make the same thing because you're an owner, somebody's getting the short end of the stick. But I've never seen two people
never equal.
Now, your ownership can be equal. That just means you should get equal profit allocations and distributions. But the compensation that you get for the job that you do should be based on the value you bring to the table, and how well did you do it, and did you actually execute on that value, for what you got paid for. And we've got a technique that we actually will go through an analysis with a multi-owner business, and everybody says, percentage of time they spend in all the various functions, and then we go out and pull market-based wage surveys, and we help them set that compensation level. So we're kind of the arbiter, in that process. It helps the process, but hey, I put it in the book, I got to live with it, so that's one thing about writing a book. You put it in there, and unless you retract it, you got to live with it.
Well, sometimes if we have to, we retract.
That's true. So far, but and I was worried about that when I wrote the book originally, but so far I hadn't had to retract anything I said.
Yeah. Now, just to go back to my listeners and some of their situations. So they go out and they start to figure out, they join local groups or whatever, and they start to see how they should have done accounting before, because they started to analyze it. How would they promote themselves? What would you recommend they do?
Well, I think, a lot of it is just, like I said, go hang out with those business entrepreneur groups. I think the other thing is you've got to probably be willing to do some projects at less than what you think you would want to charge as a test. What we currently do now for a planning session with a client that we charge $6,500 for. I did the first one. We charge $6,500 plus travel, because most of these we do travel to. All our clients are all over the country. Right. But first one I did was $2,500, and I just pulled a number out of the air that I figured, the guy had heard me talk. He was interested, and I felt like that was the number he'd say yes to. And no, it didn't cover the amount of time and effort that I did, but it allowed me to test a product.
Start somewhere.
Right. And the other thing I would do is I would start billing on a fixed price basis. So we have an initial engagement that's either a on-site planning session, or they come to us, or we do it remotely through screen share and do it over 2 phone calls. And so we have a standard structure there that says, okay, here's what we're going to do. And, and here's the methodology. So they're getting a stated thing of, here's what we're going to accomplish in that. And here's a fixed price. It's not an hourly basis.
Right.
So I think
back to the billable hour thing.
Right. Because even though and here's the thing that we've learned. I'm more concerned about the potential new client that says yes too fast. because that's a person who's desperate, and they haven't thought about what it is. And if you say yes really fast to someone who's billing by the hour, you don't know how big it can get before it gets ugly, for both sides. And so, by being able to put a price up front and say, this is what it is, here's how long it's going to take, and all those kind of things, then that sets an established relationship. And then on an ongoing basis, we scope a year's worth of service, and then we just figure up what that should be across 12 months and divide it by 12, and we charge 1 month, a monthly fee, fixed fee for those things that we are going to accomplish in that 12-month period. And we find that creates a very stable environment because it sets expectations of when we're supposed to do things. And obviously it holds our team accountable to delivering on that. So, they don't have a flexible target that says, well, if you bill by the hour, it says, well, where's the need for efficiency? Just spend a little more time on it. You can make some more money. Well, yeah, you can, but you're going to have a horrible reputation. And
no, it's not going to go well.
And really,
the flat rates is an excellent approach.
Oh, absolutely. Entrepreneurs love it because you can quote something very quickly. I don't have to. I can give them a quote verbally when we're talking about something because we have common structures of how we do things. And then it's just a matter of measuring that if the client likes you and they want you to do more, you get into a change order situation. So you got to be very good at communicating, and we're not as good as we should be. That's probably our biggest area of improvement that we can do. But you've got to raise your hand as quickly as possible when you started straying off the original engagement, and make sure that you do document what is the original engagement. Keep reminding them of what the original engagement is, and when they want to deviate, let's either do another little fixed price segment. I still like fixed price segment steps rather than
overall.
I'll just work on it a little bit extra and I'll bill you those hours. I've gotten away from that, and I tend to try to avoid it if at all possible.
Back to the pricing, it's just test. You have to, like you say, you try that and realize you can get triple that. I had a company and we were doing photography promotion booklets, and first I was selling them for $19.95, and we were selling, let's say 100 a day. Then I went to $29.95 and we sold 200 a day. Then I went to $39.95, we were selling 300 a day.
Yeah.
And when I got to 45, then it started to drop off.
Yeah.
I realized, $39, because
that's where the market is.
Yeah, that's what people put the value on, not me.
Well, we're told all the time that we're too cheap, and they're probably right to a point. But I explained it to somebody the other day, and I said, "But here's my philosophy to that. I'm in it to charge a price that allows me to make a reasonable market wage for myself and my team, and make a 10% profit. I realize I could probably make a 15 to 20% profit if I really pushed the envelope. I'm not that good of a salesman." But my bigger reason as to why I don't do it is it would eliminate a bigger portion of the market that would look at the price, no matter how valuable they thought it was, and they would just think it's too much. And I want it to be an easy adopt price because I'm trying to fix what my peers have screwed up. And I feel passionate that the entrepreneurs of this world have been sorely served by the accounting profession for the last 50 years.
But you don't want to go too low and try to make it up in volume.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm not in the change business, so absolutely. And like I said, I believe in that fundamental fairness that, I'll put in the book, 10% is the new break even. So I don't want to make less than 10% profit. And
that's pretty reasonable.
And I'm not opposed to making more than 10% profit, but what I'm opposed to is missing the broader segment of that $1 to $10 million entrepreneur. That's really my sweet spot of the people that we focus on. There's a much larger market in the million and under. 96% of all businesses in the U.S. are under $1 million. But some of those just don't have the capacity to get to the next level. In EO, our measure to be qualified as a member is you got to have at least $1 million of revenue. Even though that number has been static, we've used for 25 plus years for the organization, I think $1 million of revenue is still a significant data point for most entrepreneurs.
But if we keep going the direction we're going, it might be more like $1 million. And it's worth.
Yeah, true. Yeah, really.
Well, this has been fantastic, very informative, Greg. And what would be your final words for my listeners?
Well, I think the idea is, like I said, just stick to keep it simple, but make an impact. At this stage of my career, I've been fortunate to interact with some really cool people, and really they've challenged me to think differently in a sense that it's easy to fall into the trap of just thinking about what you do and let it define you. And I really think the idea is, you've got to set your sights on that higher purpose and that higher impact that you want to make in the world. And really, my job is to elevate the capacity of everybody I work with and interact with to help them get farther and further in life, one way or the other. And I can't do that if I do it in a way that diminishes my ability to be financially stable, but I can't do it in such a way to be a predator of the marketplace. And I think there's too much of that out there that, everybody sits back and think, oh, that's pretty cool. I got to overcharge for that. It's like, no, that's not the thing that just excites me every day.
Right. So there's the two extremes. If you're drowning, you can't help anybody. Right. And if you're gouging everyone, well, that's the other end of it.
That's right. And I'll tell you, what's interesting is when we look at data structures of doing planning sessions with clients, the only number other than fixing their labor efficiency that we see that's overspent on is consultants. Now, it's not to say that they're, all consultants are bad, because that's what I am, but I said, if a client is using a consultant, I challenge them, says they better produce results. Better be able to see tangible results.
It'd be real easy to see.
That's right, because there are people who are really good at selling stuff. And I always tell people, I said, when you're looking at your customer segment, if you rank order them in terms of profitability, you look at the 3 or 4 at the top, those are unlikely to be repeated. I want to focus and encourage people to focus on the broader segment of the market, because that's where the greater population is, and probably in the long run, the greatest impact.
But you may want to eliminate that 20% bottom piece.
Exactly, and that's very true, because, in our case, in 2003, we did the 80-20 calculation, our Pareto score, and at the 20% level, that client, they were spending about $2,200 with us. And so we said, okay, we're not going to take anybody who is the profile of a client below that line. So it helped us sharpen our focus as to who we're really trying to serve. Today, that we're actually no longer an 80-20 company. We actually, 80% of our revenue comes from about 45% of our clients. So we have a very flat curve.
Good ratio there.
Yeah, right. And so, but that bottom 20% level of that income level, that profile of that client now is $6,000 in annual spend. And so it makes it to where, we focused on people who want to have a relationship, not a transaction. And that's where, because we can't be successful in what we do in transactions. We can be successful with relationships.
Well, my thought always as an entrepreneur was, if someone can produce results, I don't mind sharing the revenue.
Right, exactly.
I mean, if it's a consultant and he's producing, you're crazy not to share the revenue, so he stays around. I mean, he's obviously improving your business. You're crazy to get rid of him. You're going to kill the goose that's laying the golden eggs here for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's been great. I appreciate it, Greg, and I will create the show notes for this, so we'll put your contact information. Just to give us to us verb, where is it best for people to get a hold of you right now?
They can view our content on simplenumbers.me is the book, what we refer to as the book website, and then my email is greg.crabtree@crbcpa.net.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes too then. Well, that's perfect. Thank you for taking all this time.
Well, thank you so much.
And you have an incredible amount of energy. Seeing how it's late in the day, and you've probably been doing this since 7 this morning.
Yep, that is true. But you can tell it is a passionate topic for me.
You love doing it, and it's accounting season, and I appreciate you taking out such a critical time of
Hey, the dirty little secret is I have a great staff who handles tax returns. I only get involved in the planning aspect. I don't have to touch a tax return anymore. So that's good. We've made that part of my life great.
You still got the pressure there, though. It's, the April's coming.
That's true. That's true. That means it ends. So,
that's true. That's good.
So good.
Yes, it's going to be over soon.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Ken.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, Steve.
Okay, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to Income for Baby Boomers with your host, Ken Queen. Helping boomers like you get a business started you can run from your own home. We interview owners of both online and offline businesses, but most importantly, ones that are run by baby boomers. Stay tuned next week for new and exciting businesses that you can start from your home. Until next time, have a profitable and blessed week.